Hey everybody, today I'm talking about Venice, which is a 1 to 5 player board game designed by David Turczi and Andrei Novac. This one takes around 90 minutes to play. This one is actually the first game of 2021 that I've played this year so far, so starting to get the new games in. And this one was released on Kickstarter quite a while ago now. There's been quite a few things preventing it from getting to the table, but it's finally here and I've been able to play it. This one is also published by Brain Crack Games, and I believe this is the second game they've brought out since they had a relatively successful hit with Ragusa a couple of years ago. And I said this is the second game in that line of titles. So you can probably tell from the game box here, the game is set in Venice. And it takes place on this big board here with all these different canals and different buildings dotted around. Each player is going to have a pair of these gondolas and a gondolier, which you can see here is placed in the back of this boat like such. You've got all these different buildings dotted around, and you're going to potentially be placing your little kind of workers out on these buildings to get bonuses as you go and visit these different locations. I should say this is the layout that's going to be much towards the end of the game. This is actually a particularly two-player game that we've just finished. But yeah, let's talk about the different things here, because naturally with a lot of Euro games, there's a lot of things going on, but the objective is to get victory points, but you can get victory points in quite a few different ways. So in addition to the main board here, you're also going to have your own individual player boards. And these are going to do a good job of explaining or breaking down the different phases in the game and what you're going to do from kind of part to part. You've also got two tracks here, and these two tracks are quite important. The first one being scrolls. Scrolls are quite an important resource because they let you kind of negate taking certain penalties, which I'll explain shortly. And they also serve as a kind of an extra resource to pick up and deliver to different locations, because a lot of the ways you're going to be getting points in this game is by using these order cards like so here, where you'll have a certain criteria, such as this one where it says, take 2 cubes, 2 grey cubes and 3 orange cubes and deliver them to the consulate. And if I was to do that, then I would get 8 victory points and 6 coins. So that's going to be a big portion of what you're going to do and how you're going to be getting your points. Again, by visiting these different locations, picking up the relative items and delivering them to the appropriate place. The second track here, the intrigue track, is going to be quite important because it can really make or break your game, because the player at the end of the game who has the most intrigue is going to be automatically disqualified from winning. So you always want to be making sure that you haven't got more intrigue than everybody else. So let's talk about how the actual game plays out and how these things are going to actually accumulate and how they're going to happen. So the first option we're going to have is to play an influence card. Now, influence cards are pretty scarce. You're not going to get too many of them throughout the game, but they let you do lots of different things and kind of break the rules and get bonuses, but normally suffering intrigue as a result of that. So for example here, this intrigue card, Bribe the Foreman, lets you move one of your workers right to the top space here, which I'll explain shortly how powerful that can be. But to do that, you're going to have to suffer intrigue, which again is not a good thing. The second thing you're going to do is to move your gondolier. So moving your gondolier is going to be how you're going to traverse the board. So as I said, you've got one gondolier, but you've got two boats themselves. And the first thing you're going to do is to actually stay in the same boat from round to round. You're going to have to pay a fee of 3 coins. So you can't just keep staying in the same boat if you can't afford to do so. And from then on, you are going to kind of map out your turn or what you're going to do. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to have to move at least one space, but the first space is free. And as you can see from all the different kind of canals here, you've got coins dotted throughout, and these are going to be the fees you're going to have to pay to travel down that particular canal. So this first spot here would be free, but if I wanted to go to here, for example, then I would have to go, that would be free. I'd pass this building, then I'd have to pay 2, and then I would end up here, for example. Of course, I could just go down this way if I wanted to, but let's say I wanted to pass this building. Now, for every building that I pass, I already have a worker on, I'm going to get the bonuses for. So for example, in this one, I drove past where I've got my yellow worker, I would be able to take 2 scrolls and be able to take an orange cube. And if I was to do that, I would place an orange cube in my boat in order to basically work towards an objective. And then whenever I stop, I am going to take the relative bonus there as well. As you can see here, some of the buildings are actually painted onto the board. For example, this St. Mark's Square, where you can get 2 coins and draw a couple of draw a couple of order cards. But let's say I ended my turn here, which relates to this building. If I didn't have a worker there, then I would deploy one and get the bonus. But if I did have a worker there, then I would move my worker up to the next spot and get both the bonuses if I wanted to, that is. But that's also going to tie into a bit of interaction, because if another player's piece was here, like so, and then I moved my worker up, it would actually push the guy already there onto the next spot, meaning that when they go there next, then they are going to get a better bonus than what they would do if I didn't push them up. There are a few other restrictions and things you have to bear in mind when traveling. For example, whenever you sail past another player's boat or another player's colour, then you are going to have to either gain an intrigue or pay a scroll to not take an intrigue. And that is going to apply to the other players too. You can pass your other boats as well, and if you do that, you can swap cubes between the two. So that's the way you can kind of jockey your different resources to work towards those orders. So the third thing you're going to do is to move your manned boat, which means you resolve meetings and past workers. That is basically triggering the different buildings on the way. And the fourth thing is to hand in a mission. That's optional. So if you have a completed order, you can take almost a bonus action to cash in that order. And when you cash in that order, not only are you going to get the rewards depicted, you're also going to get an ongoing bonus, or maybe an instant bonus. And you've got 3 opportunities to do that. So as you can see from my example here, I've already completed 3 objectives, and then from then on, these are going to give me rewards. For example, here this one says when you complete a mission, I may pay 2 coins to draw an influence card. Or if I choose to lose 3 intrigue, if I lose 3 intrigue on my turn, I get to gain 2 victory points, and then for every second scroll I gain on a turn, I gain a coin. Now, if I ever gain more than my 3, I can choose to replace these ones and just put my other completed missions to the side face down like so, which can be important because whenever you go to certain spots, for example, to draw more order cards, then I'll have to pay tax for each mission I've already completed. So it's got a slight little catch-up mechanism there, where if you are running ahead on missions, you're going to have to pay a bit of an additional fee to take more. Now, I should say what triggers the end of the game is this track here. So you've got this kind of council track, which is going to be another way to get points. Again, it's kind of just your standard track where whoever's the highest gets points, more points than the people below them. Or when the order deck runs out, and the order deck is going to kind of fluctuate on the number of players there is. So, in a 2-player game, I think there's only 9 cards. And as it gets more and more, there's going to be a few more cards in the deck. And as I said here, the final thing is to activate and advance the building that you end on or where you dock, which is when, as I said, you either deploy a new worker on that spot or move it along to the next quadrant. So let's take a look at what some of these buildings do. So all of these buildings in the first quadrant, you're going to take a resource. And I should say the resources, or at least the resources that a boat can contain, are limited to 5, but you can kind of swap in and out the ones that you want. But yeah, you've always got to bear in mind that you are limited to a strict value of 5. And as you can see here, they fit in the boats pretty nicely. And the other options are kind of things like, gaining money or gaining intrigue. Well, as you do with both here, you can gain coins and gain points. You can pay scrolls to gain points. You can, get intrigue, or the other players gain an intrigue. You can draw intrigue cards. You can climb the track. You can even build these bridges, which are these things here. And these bridges are useful because not only do they make it free to travel from one spot to another, but when another player has to sail through those bridges, they have to gain an intrigue, or when you sail through those bridges, you actually gain a coin rather than spend a coin. And so yeah, the buildings are all pretty similar, or at least not wildly different to each other, but sometimes they specialise in different things, such as losing intrigue, as I said, building bridges, climbing the track, and all different things like that. So yeah, that's pretty much how the game is going to come together. As I said, it's going to end when somebody reaches this spot on this council track, or when the order cards, when the final order card is drawn. The game marker is going to go to the to the end game trigger marker here, where you're going to play 2 more rounds before the final scores are evaluated. Any excess resources can be used to basically negate any influence you've taken. So I think it's 4 coins can move you down in influence, move you down in intrigue, and 2 scrolls. So I could pay, like, if I had 2 scrolls here, I could pay them both to move my intrigue down further, which again is extremely important, because if you have the most intrigue, then you are automatically going to lose. So let's talk about some of the mechanisms in Venice. So first off, I tend to really enjoy pick up and deliver games. I think I'm somewhat in a minority there. I know it's not the most popular of mechanisms, but I think Venice does that quite well. You know, it's pretty simple. Pick up and deliver, where you've got to just collect your cubes and move it from one place to another. However, there are things to bear in mind. Not only strategically, because you want to plan your routes by being able to afford those routes, but also tactically, because if you want to go by particular spots, maybe where you've got workers deployed, so you can get those bonuses and resources and bonuses on the way, then you're going to have to bear in mind that you're going to have to take the intrigue, which is not only going to be a decision for yourself, but also a decision that might be a net gain by giving more or other players intrigue, because, you know, if I have a bank full of these scrolls, then I can potentially choose to or afford to take that intrigue more than my opponents do, which will give them intrigue and not me. So that's quite an interesting decision there, and kind of an extra wrinkle while planning the routes to build towards these deliveries. You've got some pretty standard Euro track here. You know, whoever gets the highest gets the most points. This is very standard. The building mechanism, I think, is really clever. I do like this a fair bit. You know, where you initially, you only get the 1 bonus, but as you end up docking them more and more, you're going to get more bonuses. And not only that, you've got that additional wrinkle of when you move up, you've got to bear in mind that you could be giving other players a bonus by pushing them up. And I like the fact that, you only move up when you end there, but you get the bonuses when you just do a drive-by. And that can create some pretty strong turns if you go past a certain region. Like, for example, here, if I sail past these 3 buildings, that's quite a few resources in one turn. And you can probably get quite a bit done as you deploy more and more workers onto the board. I also quite like this slight engine building aspect here. As you complete more missions, you get to plug these powers into the bottom, which will give you ongoing effects, and that's really nice. They're not overly game breaking, but they're still worth having and can give you a nice little kick when you want it to. So, and that kind of ties into the decisions as well, because you do have to manage your resources quite carefully here. Money can get quite tight if you want to keep taking ambitious turns by sailing further and further across the board. Of course, you're always going to be having to decide whether you want to move your gondolier from one boat to the other. You're going to have to automatically do that unless you pay that fee of 3 coins, which again is going to keep digging away at your bank balance. So yeah, there's quite a few decisions here. What route you're going to go, what buildings you're going to invest in. And all things like that. So it's not a game where you're just going to wing it. You do have to plan your turns accordingly, what you're going to do so you can be efficient. So yeah, there's some decent decisions here, although it's not massively taxing in what you want to do. I think pick up and deliver games do a good job of giving you something to work towards, not only strategically but tactically as well. The time investment of the game, I think the game takes around 90 minutes to play. I think maybe at the higher player count it's going to take quite noticeably longer than that. But there are certain things that are tinkered depending on that player count, such as the deck being extended, etc. So yeah, just bear that in mind, that if you want to play constantly at a 5-player count, then it's going to go beyond that 90-minute mark. Uptime is decisions are. They can drag down quite a bit, and sometimes you can find yourself drifting away on other players' turns, because if they have a particularly significant turn here, like say I wanted to travel my boat here, I have my gondolier here, and I wanted to travel down this row here and end here, for example, then there's quite a lot of housekeeping and fiddliness on the way. Not only in terms of, are people going to pay the intrigue on the way? Am I going to pay the scrolls to negate that? I'm going to have to bear in mind how many coins I'm going to have to pay on the way. I'm going to have to bear in mind the buildings I'm going to trigger, and obviously bridges as well. So there's quite a lot of minutiae that kind of bog things down from turn to turn in these particularly hairy turns. Replayability, you have got some some modularity here in terms of, the buildings are going to be in different places. I don't think that's going to make a huge difference, to be honest. But probably because you tend to react to what the current situation on the board is. And, if I can't get a grey cube here, then, it's not like there's only 3 different types of resources anyway. So the chances are there's going to be another one, not so far away, which is going to help you a bit better because you don't have to take the intrigue by going somewhere where somewhere else is. So I don't think there's a tremendous amount of replayability here. There is quite a few order cards, but they all do different things, or very similar things, but give you different powers. So I suppose from game to game, you can use these different powers to different effects. But I don't think the replayability is tremendously good in this game, to be fair, because it very much feels like you're doing the same thing from game to game. Interaction is quite interesting. It's a bit of a double-edged sword, as in terms of the different bonuses and things you can get. So I love this building mechanism. I think this is really clever. That's kind of a passive interaction. When you want to deploy there, you can potentially push someone along and give them a kind of a passive boost. That's really clever. The intrigue is okay. I don't mind that, but as I said, it kind of bogs things down if you go through these particularly long or very cluttered canals. That can potentially be a bit of a fiddliness as well, as you say, like, I won't take the intrigue for the first one, I'll pay a scroll instead, but for the second one I will take an intrigue, and everyone's doing this at the same time, and it's just a little bit fiddly. But there's also some other interaction as well, where if I was to dock somewhere and then another person docks after me, then like so, then for every person who docks after me, I would get a point for. And sometimes you'll find that more than one person comes to the same canal or to the same dock and end up getting quite a few points that way. So another bit of interaction there. And of course, you've got the competition of the track itself, which is pretty standard fare, to be honest, with a game like this. So I do applaud the intrigue mechanism and see what they're trying to go for here. But I think maybe it's not as executed as well as they would have hoped for. Aesthetically, I think the game looks decent. I particularly love the box art. I think the box artwork is phenomenal. The game itself looks good. I think it looks fine. The symbology is pretty good, to be honest. There's a few little fiddly bits that you might have to just check the rulebook for. But I think the board itself looks fine. This kind of bird's eye view of Venice. The board, I should say, is double-sided. So on one side, you've got a kind of a brighter daytime board, and this side is the nighttime board. But functionally exactly the same, just a slightly different aesthetic. So yeah, I don't mind the way the game looks. I think it looks quite nice, and it's quite photogenic, I suppose, in terms of the wooden pieces. They all look really good. The bridges look really nice. The cards are okay. I mean, the artwork isn't the best on them, and they're a bit bland looking, but I haven't got any real complaints about the actual look or the actual artwork, etc., graphic design of the game. Where I do have a problem is in terms of the components themselves, and not the quality, but the functionality of the components. So this is actually a 2-player game where I've used these kind of bots to represent a third player, which is going to be the what you're going to do to compensate for the 2-player game. But you can probably say even from a 3-player game here, or a 2-player game, sorry, with three pairs of boats, the board is very cluttered. Like, say, for example, I wanted to have a third player come to this dock here. It's just completely sprawling across the board, and there's not enough space for people to dock, and it just doesn't look right. It becomes, as I said, cluttered and just too much in too small of areas. It's almost like either these components are too big or the board is too small. Additionally, there's a huge oversight in terms of these buildings where, when you place these workers, they completely cover up the symbology on the board. So you can't actually see what bonuses you've got, and you're going to have to constantly move them to have a look what you're doing. And that is, to be honest, a really bad design choice. It would have been so much better if they made these tiles a bit bigger, maybe had a lip on them where you could put your workers, or maybe just do a little track around the outside where you could put them. But in some places that's just not feasible as it is, because you'd be going onto the scoreboard, or in this example, if you wanted to move them off the little tile, you'd have to go on to the next one. So yeah, I think there's some really simple oversights that have been made here that could have been easily rectified. And to be honest, it can be a bit of a bugbear throughout the game. The cubes, I like the way they fit into the boats, but they're extremely fiddly. They're not quite as satisfying as they could have been. I think the gondoliers are okay. I think they fit on the boats quite nicely, but as you've probably even seen throughout this little video, they're quite hard to pick up and put down, and they're fiddly, and you drop them, and it's just. I think if you've got kind of a heavy-handed player or people with particularly big fingers, then there's going to be some issues throughout, which I know it's not a huge issue. At least, it doesn't affect the gameplay, but they are going to just probably frustrate a few players, and it just seems like it could have been an easy fix. And I think that's a bit annoying, to be honest. The setup and teardown time is not too much of an issue, to be honest. Just setting up these different tiles. I'm giving each player their starting resources. So yeah, you can get this game going in just a few minutes, and it's not the hardest game to explain. It's probably on the lighter end of the medium weight Euro scale. So yeah, not going to be too hard to get to the table and to explain to other players. The scalability, I have a bit of an issue with the 2-player count here. So if you want to play this purely as a 2-player game, or you're going to play this, or your aim is to buy this as a 2-player game, then I would recommend not doing so. Because, as I mentioned, you're going to have to play with a third dummy boat, or a pair of dummy boats, one of which labelled A, one of which labelled B, like so. And then at the end of your turn, you're going to have an additional phase where you are going to use these cards here, and you're going to draw 2 of them, and you're going to pick one, and that's going to move the either A boat or the B boat, depending on the player, from one location to another. And you're always going to take the cheapest route and kind of give intrigue as you normally would. But I always found that these choices were quite obvious, and they didn't quite interact with players in the way you would want them to. You'd normally just want them to dock where you are so you get an extra point, or go past another player because that'll give them an intrigue. So I think this is a bit of it just doesn't quite work as well as I would have liked it to. And again, it's always pretty obvious, and it doesn't have a massive impact on the gameplay. But I think optimally it's going to be best at 3 players, because you've got people doing their own thing and just passively interacting with each other. If I was to play it more than 4 or 5 players, I think the game is going to be way too cluttered, too much chaos, and the turns are going to be extremely fiddly and convoluted. The sense of progression in the game is okay, I suppose, as you're kind of building more and more workers onto the board, collecting more bonuses, you sail from one place to another. So you do have particularly more powerful turns at the end of the game, and you'll get a little bit of a kind of a route planning system going, and of course you get these additional powers from your completed missions. So it does have somewhat of a forward kind of engine building motion to it, which is decent, to be fair. And comparison wise, there's quite a few pick up and deliver games out there. If you like games like Fast Sloths, the Oracle of Delphi, then this is going to have some similarities to those. However, I would say that this one maybe is a little bit more straightforward, just going from one spot to another and just dropping the cubes off. But that additional wrinkle of the intrigue does differentiate itself from the pack. So yeah, overall, I'm a bit in 2 minds about this game. I like the idea of it, and I think it's very close to being good. However, I have a few issues, or quite significant issues, with the production and with the fiddliness. There were particular rounds where I was going from one spot to another, and it just became quite frustrating and annoying to divide or to tally up exactly what we got throughout the turn, and it just became fiddly and convoluted. I love the idea. I even like the idea of this intrigue. I think its efforts are good, but the actual attainment and the end result doesn't quite pay off in the way I wanted it to, and I almost feel a little bit disappointed by the game, because I was expecting a bit more from a David Turczi game, because he is a designer who I rate. But yeah, it didn't quite hit the highs I wanted it to, and again, I feel let down, because this kind of is a game I want to like, because I love the idea of it, I love the premise of it. I think the game could have been great had the board been a bit bigger, and yeah, it just didn't satisfy me in a way that I would have wanted it to. Don't get me wrong, it's fine, it's a decent game, probably better than the average game, to be sure, but in a market where there's so many games out there, I think maybe a game that's like this, maybe a 6 or a 6.5 out of 10, it's just not going to quite cut the mustard in today's market. And ultimately, I think in a year's time, Venice isn't going to be talked about at all, and that's a shame, because again, it's a game I wanted to like, and yeah, I've been waiting for quite a long time for it to hit the table. So yeah, unfortunately, I cannot recommend Venice, especially at a 2-player count. Don't get me wrong, if it does appeal to you and it looks interesting, then give it a try. But yeah, it certainly won't be getting my endorsement. So that is Venice. Unfortunately, yeah, I can't really praise this one. But hopefully, you've got some value and understanding about how this game plays out. So if you have enjoyed the review, please hit like and subscribe to my channel and check out my other videos too. For everyone else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye.